Welcome back, night souls. Tonight's mystery begins with a road, a quiet mountain road in Northern California, a road covered in snow, a road that should have been empty, but on that road, someone found a car, not crashed, not abandoned because it was broken, not stranded without fuel. The car worked, and yet the people inside had left it behind. They stepped out into the darkness, into the cold, into the mountains. And nearly 50 years later, nobody knows why, put on your headphones, turn off the lights and step into the dark, because tonight's candle burns for the Yuba County 5.
February 24th, 1978. The night began like so many others. 5 friends, 1 car, a basketball game already behind them, another waiting for them the next morning. The future was small, simple, predictable. They talked about the game, about tomorrow, about things that now feel painfully ordinary. Later that evening, they stopped at a small convenience store in Chico. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. They bought chocolate bars, sodas, snacks for the drive home. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. The cashier would later struggle to understand why this moment stayed with him, because at the time, it looked completely ordinary. 5 men smiling, talking, planning for tomorrow. But tomorrow would never arrive for them. When they stepped back into the cold California night, none of them knew they were leaving behind the last place where they would ever be seen alive. The store lights faded behind them. The road stretched ahead, dark, quiet, waiting. Morning came, but the 5 friends never did. At first, nobody was afraid. There were reasonable explanations. Maybe they had stayed somewhere for the night. Maybe the car had broken down. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Tomorrow had simply become a little later than expected. But as the hours passed, those explanations began to disappear. The phone never rang. No one came home. No one called to explain where they were. The basketball tournament arrived without them. On the court, 5 places remained empty. At home, 5 families waited, and waited, and waited. What began as concerns slowly became something heavier, something colder. Search teams were organized, roads were checked, gas stations were questioned. Town after town was searched. But the deeper investigators looked, the less the story made sense. It was as if the 5 men had simply stepped beyond the edge of the map. Then, days later, the mountains finally gave something back. Not the men, just the car. The car was found on a remote mountain road, far from the route the 5 friends should have taken, far from home, far from anything that made sense. Winter had settled heavily over the mountains, snow covered the ground, the trees stood silent, the wind moved through the forest like a whisper, and somewhere in that vast white wilderness, the search finally found something. For a moment, hope returned. The search was over, or so it seemed. There, sitting alone beside the road, was the group's car. Not wrecked, not buried beneath the snow, not destroyed by the cold, just waiting. Investigators approached carefully, expecting answers. Instead, they found a mystery. There were no signs of violence, no signs of a struggle, no sign that anyone had left in a hurry. The car seemed almost untouched, as though its occupants had stepped out for a moment and simply never returned. Then came the detail that changed everything. The engine worked. There was fuel in the tank. The car was capable of taking them home. Investigators stood where the 5 men had once stood. They looked back down the road. Home was that way. Safety was that way. Then they looked ahead. Only darkness, only snow, only the mountains. And somehow, for reasons nobody has ever been able to explain, the 5 friends chose the mountains. The search continued. The mountains were patient. They gave up their secrets slowly, one piece at a time. Days turned into weeks. Storms came and went. Fresh snow covered old tracks. And still, the 5 friends remained missing. Then the mountains finally spoke. A body was found, then another, and another. scattered across the wilderness, separated by distance, separated by silence. Each discovery answered one question and raised a dozen more. The men had left the car, that much was certain. But what investigators could not understand was why they kept going. Hours earlier, they had been laughing together after a basketball game, talking about tomorrow, making plans. Now, those plans lay buried beneath the snow. The farther investigators traced their journey, the stranger it became. Every step carried them farther from the car, farther from warmth, farther from help, farther from any explanation. And still, they continued. That was the detail investigators could never escape. Not that the men died, but that they continued, one step, then another, as if they believed there was something ahead worth reaching, or perhaps as if they believed there was no way back. Whatever they were thinking, whatever they believed, whatever drove them forward, it was powerful enough to keep them moving long after reason would have told them to stop. And deeper in the mountains, beyond the snow, beyond the darkness, the strangest discovery of all was still waiting to be found. Then, months after the 5 friends disappeared, investigators found something unexpected. A Forest Service trailer, alone in the mountains, hidden beneath the snow. It wasn't much, just a small metal shelter standing against the cold. But inside, someone had been there. The door had been opened. Some food had been used. Someone had survived long enough to leave traces behind. And that was impossible to ignore, because the trailer contained something the mountains had refused to offer: shelter. Inside were supplies, food, blankets, a chance, not a good chance, but a chance. Then, investigators made their most disturbing discovery. Inside the trailer lay Ted Weir. He had not died immediately after leaving the car. Evidence suggested he had survived for weeks, possibly even months. Alone, high in the mountains, waiting for help, for rescue, for someone. The mystery should have ended there, but it didn't, because all around him were things that might have kept him alive even longer. Food remained untouched, supplies remained unused, possibilities remained unexplored. And suddenly, the question was no longer how the 5 men got here. The question became, what happened inside this trailer? Then investigators found Ted Weir, and the mystery changed. Until that moment, the mountains had seemed cruel. Now they seemed impossible, because Ted had not died that night. He had not died the next day. He had survived. For weeks, maybe longer. Think about that. Outside, winter buried the mountains beneath snow, day after day, night after night. And somehow, Ted was still alive, waiting, hoping, listening, for footsteps, for voices, for rescue, for anything. But the detail investigators could never forget was not that Ted survived, it was where he survived. The trailer contained food, not a little, enough to keep someone alive, blankets, shelter, a chance. And yet, Ted Weir died there, not because there was nothing, but because there was still something left when he died. That is the detail that refuses to let go, even now. But the trailer held one final mystery, a mystery with a name: Gary Mathias. Of the 5 friends, Gary was the only one who was never found. No body, no final resting place, no answer, just an absence. And in a case already filled with impossible questions, that absence became the largest question of all. Investigators found Gary's shoes inside the trailer, a small detail, easy to overlook, but impossible to forget. Because shoes tell a story, his shoes were there, which means Gary was there too. For a moment, he stops being a missing person. He becomes real again, standing inside that trailer, breathing the same cold air as Ted Weir, looking out at the same mountains, listening to the same silence. Gary reached the trailer. That much seems certain. The mystery is what happened after. Did he leave looking for help? Did he believe rescue was close? Did he think he could make it back? No one knows. Because after the trailer, Gary Mathias disappears from the story. completely. The mountains returned 4 of the 5 friends. Gary Mathias was not one of them. Nearly 50 years later, he still isn't. And perhaps that is the cruelest part of all. Not that the mystery remains unsolved, but that the only person who may have known the answer vanished with it. Nearly 50 years have passed since that winter night. Investigators have proposed theories, researchers have searched for answers, families have spent decades wondering what happened, and yet, the heart of the mystery remains untouched, because all roads lead back to the same question. The same road, the same car, the same decision. The car worked, there was fuel in the tank, home was behind them, and still, they walked away. 5 friends left a basketball game, stopped for snacks, made plans for tomorrow. Hours later, they were climbing into the mountains, into the snow, into a mystery that has outlived them all. Perhaps there is an explanation, perhaps there always was. But if so, it disappeared into the mountains with them. And maybe that is why the story of the Yuba County 5 continues to haunt people. Not because we know what happened, but because we don't. Because somewhere between that working car and that lonely trailer, something occurred that changed 5 lives forever. And whatever it was, the mountains never gave it back. The mountains returned 4 of the 5 friends, the car, the trailer, a handful of clues, but not the answer. The answer is still out there, buried somewhere between the snow, the silence, and the last footsteps that disappeared into the dark. There are many more mysteries waiting in the dark. If you'd like to hear them, keep the candle burning. I'll see you in the next story. Good night.